In a world, she is the widow in yellow who toppled a dictatorship in a steering show of people power in 1986. To her native Philippines, she is the courageous president who saw off a series of coups d'etats and single-mindedly restored the institutions of democracy. But to herself, Corazon C Aquino is just a plain housewife who in all conscience could not refuse her country's call to service. When her husband, former Senator Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., was assassinated in 1983, she continues to serve after her term of office ended in 1992 through her work with non-governmental organizations. What is important is that we believe in the Almighty and that we try to do whatever we can to help ease some of the suffering of our people, she says. I always tell my children, I don't know how many good years I still have left, but whatever I can do at this time, I really want to be able to continue, not only for the cause of democracy, but also to help in bringing about a better Filipino. For the rest of my life, I will be doing whatever I can to improve things. The stage was set for a contest between Ninoy's widow and his political nemesis. The next presidential polls were not due until 1987 but pressed by the United States and the country's international creditors to prove his mandate. Marcos called a snap presidential election for 1986. After a day of fasting and prayer, Cory declared her candidacy over the objections of many in her family. Dressed in her trademark yellow, she drew huge crowds wherever she went. Marcos derided Cory as just a woman whose place was in the bedroom. She called him a coward for threatening to take her out with a single bullet and promised him no more than a single ballot in return. The election was held on February 7, 1986. As expected, Marcos' henchmen did everything to ensure victory, from bribery to coercion, to stealing ballot boxes, and to manipulating the counting. But a third force had entered the equation. In the past, the middle class, the business community, and the Catholic Church had shied from politics, but Ninoy's murder and his widow's candidacy had galvanized them. One of the most compelling images of the 1986 election was that of nuns, students, and professionals forming human chains to guard the ballot. Another was the walkout of computer programmers. Many of them were women from the control center of the National Canvassing Office. The numbers they were inputting into their machines, which showed that Cory was leading, were not being reflected in the tabulation boards, which were giving Marcos the edge. But the Marcos-controlled legislature proclaimed their patron winner with 10,807,197 votes to Cory's 9,291,716 votes. Cory rejected the result and called for a non-violent protest movement. Then reformist elements of the armed forces made their move. Threatened with arrest, Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile and Armed Forces Vice Chief of Staff Fidel Ramos holed up in Camp Crame along Manila's main thoroughfare, Epifanio de los Santos Avenue. Jaime Cardinal Sin appealed for civilian support over Radio Veritas in a repair of Ninoy's funeral and Cory's campaign rallies. Filipino It was the birth of people power, a non-violent way for ordinary citizens to reclaim their freedom and bring about a peaceful transfer of power. Television viewers across the world marveled as hundreds of thousands of praying Filipinos, armed only with rosaries and flowers, against repulsed tanks and armored vehicles. Cory took her oath of office as the country's 11th president at 11 a.m. on February 25, 1986 at Club Filipino. Meanwhile, the woman who never wanted to become a president buckled down to work. Her first priority was the restoration of democracy, but she went about it in a counterintuitive way. She abolished the legislature, declared a revolutionary government, and appointed a 50-member commission to write a new constitution. Cory and her advisers felt it would be too difficult to work with a parliament that was beholden to Marcos in the task of restoring democracy. In theory, a revolutionary government could do whatever it wanted, but Cory was careful not to go down that road. I was governing alone and I could have had all the powers, but I did not take them, she points out. I always abided by the Bill of Rights and I was committed and definitely dedicated to the rule of law. Ours is a government that came to power born on the shoulders of our people. We must therefore govern on the basis of that same people power. These were the very words of President Corazon C Aquino, words that laid the foundation of the highest office of the land. For 6 years and 4 months, her people-powered presidency reflected itself in the very nature of the executive branch and on the implementation of several projects closest to the president's heart. There are three primary problems that revolve around Aquino's administration. First is the displeased citizens, second is the power shortage, and third is the rampant burnouts. Corazon Aquino's promises during the elections and inauguration. Erosion of our sense of nation, to create jobs and livelihood, deliver social services, bring about peace and order, improve the lives of our people, mobilize the spirit of volunteerism, especially among the youth, by documenting and publicizing examples of selfless service to country and people by groups and individuals working in and with the grassroots. Corazon Aquino's inauguration speech. I, as the President of the Philippines, will serve and defend its fundamental law, execute its just laws, do justice to every man, and consecrate myself to the service of the nation. So help me God. Corazon Aquino's laws and programs, restoration of democracy, abolished the legislature, declared a revolutionary government, land reform, free secondary schooling, Proclamation Number 9, Core Issues Proclamation Number 9, which provides for the creation of a constitutional commission to draft a new charter truly reflective of the ideals and aspirations of the Filipino people. On or before September 2 of the same year, she appoints 48 men and women, led former Justice Cecilia Munoz Palma, to be members of the CONCOM. Cory, in her inaugural address, issues her first edict, Proclamation Number 1, calling all appointed public officials to submit their courtesy resignations. In her speech, she proceeded to reorganize the government, issuing Executive Order Number 1. 1 month after assuming the presidency, Cory issues Proclamation Number 3 proclaiming her government a revolutionary government. With this, she suspends the 1973 Constitution installed during martial law and promulgates a Provisional Freedom Constitution, which vests legislative making powers on her pending the enactment of the new Constitution. Executive Order Number 88. Cory issues Executive Order 48 creating an ad hoc special committee to supervise the liquidation of the affairs of the Constitutional Commission of 1986, preservation of its records, and to undertake its constitutional education campaign. United States trading in the first Philippine Funding Corporation. On November 9, she opens United States trading in the first Philippine Funding Corporation. She later spoke at a meeting of the United States Chamber of Commerce and the United States Philippine Business Committee, where she urged American business to increase its investment in the Philippines. Ratification of a 1991 treaty. A president must also learn how to bow to the inevitable, as Cory had to do with the negotiations on the renewal of the U.S. lease on its military bases in the Philippines. After keeping her options open, she signaled her support for the ratification of a 1991 treaty, allowing the Americans continued access to the installation for 10 years, with the option to renew for another 10. The Senate voted 12 to 11 against the agreement, and the Americans were out of the country by 1992. Administrative Code of 1987 establishes the various cabinet departments and offices falling within the executive branch of government and under the direct control and supervision of the President. The Code also prescribes the administrative procedure and undertaking the proceedings before the offices under the executive department. Executive Order Number 228, July 16, 1987, declared full ownership to qualified farmer beneficiaries covered by Philippine Decree 27. It also determined the value remaining unvalued rice and corn lands. Executive Order Number 229, July 22, 1987, provided mechanism for the implementation of the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, or CARP. Proclamation Number 131, July 22, 1987, instituted the CARP as a major program of the government. It provided for a special fund known as the Agrarian Reform Fund with an initial amount of 50 billion pesos to cover the estimated cost of the program from 1987 to 1992. Executive Order Number 129A, July 26, 1987, streamlined and expanded the power and operations of DAR. Republic Act Number 6657, June 10, 1998, or Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law, an act which became effective June 15, 1988, and instituted a comprehensive agrarian reform program to promote social justice and industrialization, providing the mechanism for its implementation and for other purposes. Executive Order Number 405, June 14, 1990, vested in the Land Bank of the Philippines the responsibility to determine land valuation and compensation for all lands covered by CARP. Executive Order Number 407, June 14, 1990, accelerated the acquisition and distribution of agricultural lands, pasture lands, fish ponds, agroforestry lands, and other lands of the public domain suitable for agriculture. There are two main beneficiaries of these implemented laws and programs. First are the corporate owners of the lands, which were able to distribute stocks instead of land ownership to the farmers. Second is the common people who were able to survive the Marcos regime and still adjusting for the democracy and freedom that they have achieved. Holes and shortcomings of the laws. She wasn't really able to solve the country's problems by implementing all that she promised because she was constantly distracted by the coup d'etats that threatened the country and her administration. She focused a lot on disaster management, but it was necessary for her to keep the peace. Aquino was not spared from the controversies that eventually centered on Hacienda Luisita, a 6,453-hectare estate located in the province of Tarlac, which she inherited from her family. She was scored for allowing Hacienda Luisita, which was now owned by Tarlac Development Corporation, to opt for stock distribution instead of land redistribution. She also has an issue concerning the farmers of Mindiola being massacred. Corazon Aquino became the president of the country because the people believed she was the positive change they needed, especially since her husband Ninoy, who was supposed to be the change for the country, passed away in a gunshot. During her administration, Cory was plagued by coup d'etats by various groups that foreign investors started to pull their investments from the country. That's why a lot of her efforts were pointed towards disaster management from the various groups, and sometimes her motherly methods such as giving care worked. She was also linked to controversies such as massacring farmers in Mindiola and holding the land she inherited rather than having it distributed. Despite these problems, the economy still had a positive growth during her term with an average of 3.8% by the end of it. Cory, although wasn't the best qualified president, still did a pretty good job. Compared to Marcos or Ramos though, it still fell short of what truly makes a spectacular leader, which is why she's rated as an average president.